Thank you for giving us this opportunity, PhilExport, to brief you and the membership about the market trends, opportunities, and challenges in ASEAN. So the outline of my presentation this afternoon would be very straightforward. I think I'll discuss first about ASEAN in brief, just to refresh our memories and our understanding of what ASEAN is. And then briefly, I'll talk about what are the goods that we trade in ASEAN. And I'll go on with the opportunities and trends in ASEAN, including the challenges, the tools available for exporters, and then the team that handles the ASEAN markets with the DTI overseas offices. ASEAN is an organization in Southeast Asia. The bloc's biggest success has been promoting economic integration among its members. ASEAN's regional grouping actually promotes not just economic, but also political and security cooperation. ASEAN countries have a total population of more than 650 million people and a combined gross domestic product of 2.8 trillion US dollars. The group has played a role in Asian economic integration, and in fact, as mentioned by Alan earlier, they spearhead the negotiations of the world's largest free trade area, and they in fact signed 6 FTAs with other regional economies. ASEAN is located in Jakarta, and important decisions are usually reached through consensus and consultations. ASEAN was formed in 1967 that brings together countries with significant different economies and political systems. For example, Singapore boasts the highest GDP per capita, while Myanmar is the lowest when it comes to per capita income. The members' political system also varies. We have democracies and we have hybrid regimes. Demographics also differs across the region, and with many religious and ethnic groups present in each of ASEAN member states. ASEAN's geography also includes archipelagos and continental lands, with land masses that vary significantly that affects each member state's economies and priorities. In 2019, in fact, when it comes to economic performance, in 2019, ASEAN economy performed well. However, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, most of the ASEAN member states experienced contraction and recession last year. In terms of intra-regional trade, intra-ASEAN trade has been the largest. In fact, both for export and import markets, trade within ASEAN is growing. And after ASEAN member states are actually trading with China, US, and the European Union. In terms of investment, the top investors in ASEAN are also the intra-ASEAN member states. So we have Singapore, we have Malaysia, and we have Thailand. And then most of the investments in the region also comes from EU, Japan, China, India, and Korea. The top sectors for investments in ASEAN includes financial services, wholesale and retail, and manufacturing. So this is just to refresh your memories of what are the network of ASEAN FTAs that Alan has mentioned earlier. Since ASEAN has made notable progress towards economic integration, we have the AFTA, which is the ASEAN Free Trade Area, with the goal of creating a single market and increasing intra-ASEAN trade and investment. Intra-ASEAN trade, as a share of the bloc's overall trade, grew about 19% to 23%. And the bloc has prioritized 11 sectors, which includes electronics, automotives, rubber-based products, textiles, agro-based, and tourism. Hindi ko na po iisa-isahin, but this is just to show you the range of ASEAN FTAs that we have. And I'm sure in some of the PhilExport briefings, we have some of this has been discussed already, including the RCEP. In terms of specific products that ASEAN is trading with the world, most of the ASEAN exports include industrial goods. So we have electrical machinery and equipment, integrated circuits, mobile phones, telephone sets, vegetable oils, and vehicles. And when it comes to ASEAN imports, practically they are the same product. And I think this is where the regional value chains that started way years back is happening also in the region. What we export is actually what we import. And I think this was substantially discussed earlier by ASEC Alan again, because ASEC Alan mentioned that some of the products that we export are actually inputs to the final products that we export as well. In terms of Philippine trade to ASEAN, the Philippines is deeply involved in ASEAN trade. And under the ASEAN member states, most of our top ASEAN markets for PH exports are the following. This is actually in particular order. In terms of volume of trade, we have Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And then in terms of import supplier in ASEAN, our number one import supplier from ASEAN is Indonesia, followed by Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. As of April 2021, ASEAN accounts for 16.9% of total PH exports to the world, which amounted to almost $1 billion. And in terms of import, ASEAN accounts for 28.5% of total PH imports from the world. In terms of specific products that we trade within ASEAN, most of our exports to ASEAN, again, are industrial goods, integrated circuits, semiconductors, and so on and so forth. And in terms of importation from ASEAN, it's a mix of industrial goods and agricultural commodities. So we have coal, petroleum oils, ICs, motor vehicles, animal and vegetable fats, and then rice. This is just to show you what are the food imports and exports that we are getting from ASEAN. In terms of food exports, based on the records, available data, the top food exports that the Philippines have with ASEAN includes food for infants, milk and cream, bananas, tunas, cereals, desiccated coconuts, cocoa beans, wheat, and mesclun flour, and then chewing gum. In terms of imports, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have rice, and then coffee mixes and essences, maize, food for infants again, mineral waters, sauces and condiments, cane molasses, beet of cane sugar, milk, and cream. This is just to give you an idea of what products are we exporting and importing within the ASEAN region. So I'll go on now in discussing about what are the opportunities available for our exporters. What are the product segments that we can improve, or that we can penetrate more, or we can supply? So according to ITC Trade Map, they have identified potential products, Philippine potential products for exports in the ASEAN region. So the identified products are the following. We have the smart cards, electronic integrated circuits, LED lamps, parts of office machines, and computer data storage units. So the products that I mentioned, the projected export value of these products, if we are going to penetrate additional market in ASEAN, is worth $3.2 billion. And aside from this, ITC also projected increased demand for tunas, bananas, raw cane sugar, coconut oil, guavas, crabs, shrimps, handbags that also have high export potential in the ASEAN region. To show you completely the data from the ITC, this is a tree map of the Philippine products with greatest export potential in ASEAN. Since ibibigay naman po namin yung copy ng presentation to PhilExport, I will not go through it. You can read it during your free time. In terms of demand in ASEAN, the demand component based on this data is based on projected imports. Thus, markets and imports of products are augmented based on the capacity of ASEAN member states to import such products. So the products with greatest export potential from ASEAN from Philippines to ASEAN are the following. So some of the products, if I can mention here, includes tuna, coconut oil, inductors, diodes, and most of them are really industrial goods. In terms of our capacity to supply based on those products that are in demand, These are the top products that we have the capacity to supply based on the data provided in the ITC with their projected market share. So we have crude coconut oil again, semiconductors, and so on and so forth. So this would tell us that in case we diversify our export to ASEAN, this would be the products that will have the Philippine that will constitute Philippines' best options for export diversification in Southeast Asia. So these products includes gloves, palm oil, edible products of animal origin, um, knit or crochet dyed fabrics, and so on and so forth. These are the products that will have a high demand based on the projections made by ITC. In terms of market, again, if we are going to diversify our exports to ASEAN, in terms of the projection, the top markets in ASEAN that will have the greatest potential for Philippine exports would be Singapore, followed by Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia. These are still the largest markets in ASEAN. I want to go over now with some of the market trends in ASEAN. Actually, because of the pandemic, overall, e-commerce is likely to grow, which is we've seen the growth of e-commerce last year, and then this year and moving forward, e-commerce will still likely to grow at double digits, accounting for roughly 13% based on the research conducted by Facebook and Bain. The pandemic provided more compelling reason to embrace digital transformation, and digitalization is key. I think this is the key message that I want to share with our exporters, because the e-commerce that we have right now has actually shifted from a pull to push model, meaning it's not a question now of should I go to e-commerce, but rather a statement that I should be in the e-commerce platform for our exporters. E-commerce industry changes the lifestyle and business operations in ASEAN. And again, according to Facebook, 83% of the ASEAN 6 intends to still increase online spending post-pandemic. E-wallet shows the highest growth in the preferred mode of payment, and then convenience would be prevalent as manifested in the clamor of most of the ASEAN population to have ready-to-eat meals, open-air establishments. Again, this is because of the pandemic. And then lastly, one of the key trends in ASEAN is that health is wealth because of the pandemic experience. There is a rising shift to plant-based alternatives, rising demand for healthier diets, people are cooking at home. And again, in ASEAN 6, more than 50% of the consumers think that whatever they eat and drink has changed for the better. This one, I want to share with everyone that according to the World Economic Forum, these are the factors that will propel ASEAN's growth. And ASEAN is poised to become a dramatic consumption opportunity because of its favorable demographics, rising income levels, geopolitical shifts, and digital tailwinds. And to explain further on this ASEAN's growth, these mega growth areas will be driven by the consumption themes in ASEAN. So first, 8 key consumption themes will emerge. Some of them are accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and some of them are because of course, by necessity. So first one is consumer spending in ASEAN. Consumer spending will double in ASEAN. While the looming recession was triggered by COVID-19, the COVID-19 will dampen consumer sentiment and reduce overall spending within the year. Next would be the boundaries of premium and value shopping will blur. It only means that consumption behavior has changed significantly as many communities have still in quarantine in ASEAN. So it means that before, if we are spending on luxury items or we're spending on non-essential goods, because of the pandemic, now people are spending on disaster preparedness or daily essentials. Number three is digital ubiquity will become the new normal. Again, this is something to do with the digitalization of our processes and our movements when it comes to goods. The pandemic is accelerating the digital future, with many consumers making their first digital purchases and existing consumers spending more time online. Um, in ASEAN, the average time that the population spent on social media is actually at 4.2 hours of mobile screen time, which is 1.2 times higher than the global average. Next is technology-enabled platforms will tear down socioeconomic walls. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerates the digital transformation process in the government and businesses as stakeholders are striving to provide connectivity and everyday essentials to vulnerable communities. Because of this one, it will remove barriers for small businesses to flourish and enable delivery of basic services such as healthcare and education online. Lastly, no, number five, sorry for that, local and regional competitive wins will prevail. It only means that most of the ASEAN member states will clamor to have supporting their local products. This trend will continue even in times of crisis. In fact, even in the Philippines and Indonesia, in Thailand and Singapore, there is a clamor for supporting local brands. During COVID-19, local food and beverages conglomerates are also an advantage as consumers tend to prefer large and trusted brands, and they look for lower prices, availability, and security. Next would be shoppers will move beyond omni-channel to expect omnipresence. Again, because of the pandemic, the way that we deliver our goods will practically change, and again, this will be online. Convenience will be the new currency, and then health of people and the planet will be non-negotiable, which leads to the fact that most of the products that are in demand now in the region are mostly the sustainable products. In ASEAN also, according to the research made by YouGov, more value-seeking customers are more intentional about what they buy. This is what I mentioned earlier. Instead of buying the non-essential ones, most of the ASEAN shoppers are conscious when it comes to spending. This one, I'll show you just some bits of trends in select ASEAN member states that we asked the team in ASEAN to provide us this afternoon. I will not go again one by one on these trends, and since we will give the presentation to PhilExport, but let me highlight some of them. In Singapore, online grocery shopping will continue as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. There is an increasing number of independent specialty retail stores selling premium gourmet or organic and wholesome natural food products. In Singapore as well, there's a growing retail, food processing, hotel and restaurant, institutional sectors, dependent on the broad range of imported food products. In Indonesia, as I mentioned earlier, the Support Local campaign has been increasing. In Indonesia, there's a Vocal for Local campaign where there is more support for local brands, which is the expected significant consumer trend in 2021. I want to emphasize also halal. Halalness is important in this market, and ready-to-go meals are rising. There are more cost-conscious consumers, which less willing to spend on non-essentials like dining out, hotel stays, and they're looking for more ways to save money and switch to cheaper alternatives. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic as well, there is a major shift to health and pharmaceutical products. And social media is the top channel in Indonesia where brands interact with customers. So for our exporters, it is good that you have your social media presence when penetrating most of the markets, not just in Indonesia, but also in ASEAN. In Malaysia, online food delivery is on the rise. I think this is a similar trend in most of the ASEAN member states. Online shopping grew by 83%. There is a rising demand for furniture, furnishings, home improvement exports, electrical and electronics. I think this is because Um, Again, not just in Malaysia, but most of ASEAN member states, some companies and even in the government instituted a work from home arrangements. And then there is also an increase in fashion and clothing retail in the Malaysian market. In Thailand, Thai consumers are showing much more interest in plant protein. Again, convenience is a key driver. Meal kits to prepare various types of cuisines in the comfort of their homes are becoming more popular. Keto-friendly and gluten-free products are also prevalent in Thailand, including dietary supplements and organic products. New products that offer new experience, such as the combination of product categories or the crossover between food and cosmetics, like beauty drinks and Coca-Cola cosmetics, are also rising in Thailand. In Vietnam, for example, food and beverage is still on growth trajectory. And in fact, 15% of the GDP of Vietnam is contributed to food and beverages. Goods related to food, health, and home transported doubled in 2020, according to Shopee. And then 53% of the population in Vietnam has participated in online shopping. Key areas of expenditures of the Vietnamese are on fresh food, FMCG, education, eating and drinking out, entertainment, and traveling. Vietnamese now are also looking for convenience with the prevalence of the ready-to-eat meals. Less sugar, more natural ingredients, and then smart living needs in some of the Vietnamese homes. We listed here some of the challenges that we experience in monitoring the ASEAN markets. The first one that we want to highlight is that exporters and suppliers should be mindful that these markets are highly competitive and price sensitive. Not to mention that the campaign also to support their local demand. So the competition is really high in these markets. China and other suppliers have also gained market share in most of the ASEAN member states. Third, we have to address trade facilitation concerns in these markets, as some of the markets has a huge prevalence of non-tariff measures, which resulted already for them to be, some of them to be barriers for entry of our export commodities. As I mentioned also, the market is diverse with huge local competition. And then as we go through the pandemic, it is important for our businesses, our exporters, and our businesses in general to future-proof your businesses, including digitization of the processes. Other policy developments and available tools for exporters, I think ASEAN-wide self-certification was mentioned earlier by Ms. Georgie. We also have the Assist, the Tariff Finder, and then the ASEAN Trade Repository, wherein you can see most of the regulations when it comes to exporting in the ASEAN market. Tariff Finder, we have that as well. And then the ASEAN Solutions for Investment Services and Trade. We want to emphasize also that for our exporters to utilize existing ASEAN FTAs and including the eventual implementation of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. We highlighted also here some of the major developments in select markets, like for example in Malaysia. Malaysia is moving towards establishing e-commerce tax and payments. This will affect your exports to these markets. In Indonesia, halal accreditation and certification is ongoing, and Indonesia also introduced digital taxation for products traded cross-border. In Singapore, Singapore is investing in agri-tech and research and development to help local agriculture and to improve the capacity of their aquaculture companies because of the country's production limitations. So with that, we would be happy to answer some of your questions given the time constraints this afternoon. Should you have a country-specific questions, I would like to direct you to the team in ASEAN of the Philippine Trade and Investment Center. So we have Rico Mariano based in Bangkok. He also handles Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. I'm based in Jakarta, Indonesia, and I also cover Timor-Leste from Jakarta. And then we have Kat Banzon, who is based in Kuala Lumpur and covering Singapore, Malaysia, Labuan, Sabah, and Sarawak. We are social. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And our last message to our exporters: you got this. We stand ready to assist and guide you all throughout. Just let us know. Connect with us. Our contact information are here provided with you. And maraming salamat po.